Thank you so much, Holly, and to all of you at WIMDI for having me here to present to you tonight on a manager's guide to dealing with toxic employees. Let's just get right into it. I am Julie Christiansen, and you're probably wondering who the heck is this woman? I'm an anger and communication expert. I'm a registered psychotherapist and an author and an executive coach, and I live in the beautiful Niagara region of Ontario. I was asked what are my food faves, and I have to say I love the salty and the sweet. My favorite, though, if you held a gun to my head and said, what do you really love? I have to go for the chocolate covered almonds every single time. Dark chocolate, absolutely my favorite. I am an author. I've written 14 books. My best-selling book is called The Rise of Rage. It just came out in February of this year. I'm going to circle back around to that at the end of our talk and give you some opportunities to engage with that book. We are situated, Leverage You, my company is situated on the shared traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee. We offer our sincere gratitude to them as the stewards of this land, which is protected by the dish with one spoon wampum agreements, 3 principles, and I love these, so I want to share them with you. The wampum agreements 3 principles are take only what you need, leave enough for others, and always keep the dish clean. Today, many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities from across Turtle Island continue to live and work in this territory. Acknowledging the people whose territory we're on and the agreements that guide their stewardship of the land reminds us to reflect on and respect their unique relationship to this land. It also is an invitation for all of us, and I love what Holly and WIMDI is doing in terms of giving back to your community. It's an invitation for all of us to identify and engage in actions like those that respect and reinforce our commitments to truth and reconciliation and Indigenous rights in Canada and around the world. So let's get right into it. We're going to tackle an issue that can silently or not so silently drain the energy, resources, and passion from your workplace, and that is toxic employees. These individuals can wreak absolute havoc on your organization, leading to high turnover, increased employee benefit costs, union disputes, wrongful dismissal lawsuits. But beyond those tangible losses, perhaps the most damaging is the loss of peace and productivity in your team. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look at 6 types of toxic behaviors in the workplace, and then we'll equip you with some actionable strategies to detox that work environment and foster a healthier, more productive workplace. All right, so let's get started. And we will begin with the cost of toxicity. I want to share a couple of numbers with you that hopefully will not curl your hair completely, but they will give you something to think about as we move forward through this talk. The first number is 12,506. This is estimated by Grammarly, according to their research. I believe it was done in 2022. The cost of poor communication and toxic behaviors to U.S. businesses is $12,506 per employee per year. 12,506 per employee per year. And here's another number that might curl your hair just a little bit more. The cost of poor communication and toxic behaviors, again, same Grammarly study, found that for companies with fewer than 100 employees, the cost per company was $420,000 per year. That's average. So some companies are losing more, some are losing less, but the average is $420,000 per year. Can your company, just ask yourself, can your company afford to lose $420,000 per year? My company can't even afford to lose 12,000. All right, that 420, dude, I can't, right? So when you think of that and think about the types of toxic behaviors that show up in the workplace that contribute to this bleeding of funds, it shows us how important it is, if for no other reason than the bottom line. And hopefully we're not as mercenary as that. But if for no other reason than the bottom line, why it's important to weed out toxic employees from your workplace. So speaking of weeds, weeds can take over the whole garden if we don't nip them in the bud. Now, all it takes is one bad seed, right? One bad seed to poison the workplace. And often that seed is indistinguishable from the other healthy seeds. Often we don't even recognize the invasive weed until it's fully grown. And that may be a problem. But the good news is that it's really never too late to remediate a weed infestation. So I would love for you to share with me in the chat, and this is my favorite question when I give this talk, if negativity is a weed, what makes it grow? Oh, I love this one, negative inner voice, and then listening to it. Yes, we don't have to listen to our inner voice if it's being negative, do we? Managers who let complainers take over meetings, attention to the negativity. Yeah, absolutely. Favoritism, blame. Yeah, these are all good. Neglect. Absolutely. Yeah. And along with the blaming and the complaining is the shaming, right? Inertia within teams. Yeah, that lack of motivation. We're definitely going to hit on that tonight. Yes, not addressing it. Let's just pretend we're ostriches. We'll bury our heads in the sand and we won't pay attention. Yeah, when the psychological safety, oh my gosh, I could talk about that forever, but I won't because we don't have that much time. But yes, absolutely. When the psychological safety of a workplace is compromised, not good, not good at all. So everything that you've mentioned here in the chat can be grouped into different types of behaviors. And so we're going to look at those 6 types of toxic employees. And we are going to begin with the steamroller. The steamroller is a know-it-all. It's a know-it-all with bully tendencies. They tend to push, manipulate, or intimidate other people into going along with their point of view. And they often come up with really grand ideas, oh, I'm going to do this. And I think, our department could do this and it'll just push us to the top of the sales charts. And it's a great idea, or at least it sounds like a great idea, but it doesn't have a lot of substance. So they insist that those ideas ought to be implemented, but they don't really think through all of the details, right? They're not thinking about how their ideas might impact other departments or how they might even impact members of the team. So the steamrollers stifle creativity and diversity of opinion because, like you said, if the steamroller gets to own the floor all the time and they're not sort of kept in check, then what happens is the other people with creative ideas or contributions will hold them back. So there's less diversity of opinion. And if they're successful in always pushing forward their agendas, people are going to check out, right? And it makes the organizational very one-dimensional and it makes it less agile. So now we have the social loafer. And the social loafer is defined by simple psychology as the phenomenon where individuals exert less effort in a group or in a group task than when they're working alone. So this often occurs when there's a perception of reduced accountability or shared or diffused responsibility. And what I mean by that is shared diffused responsibility happens when each individual team member's efforts are combined into a group project. It becomes more difficult to pinpoint the contributions of each member. And then you get this idea that because the responsibility is shared or diffused amongst all the members of the team, you can't really tell who's doing what. And then the team gets rewarded, but certain people may just poop out, they just check out. And so they're not really engaged. They let everybody else do the work. Social loafing results in resentment due to other workers feeling overwhelmed and sensing unfairness in the process because they're the ones picking up the slack of the loafers. So since the work of the team is being judged rather than individual efforts, the more conscientious workers are going to feel responsible to do what's necessary to affect the positive outcomes. So they will feel overworked and unfairly rewarded, while the social loafer feels gratified in having achieved this great outcome without having to do a whole lot of work. Over time, social loafing can lead to reduced productivity and it leads to lower profits. And then we have the ideas thief. This is typically someone who's in a position of power, more than likely middle to upper management, but sometimes it can also be a peer. When a worker presents an idea that will, help increase profits or help the company to run leaner, or they come up with something that will boost morale for the team, the ideas thief immediately dismisses the idea as inappropriate. It's too expensive. It's too much work. When sufficient time has passed, then the ideas thief will tweak the idea. They'll put their personal spin on it, and then they'll introduce the concept to the team and engage them with buy-in to move it forward, typically using the steamroller technique. All right, let's talk about the narcissist. So the narcissist is easily spotted as most of their communication is very me, egocentric in nature. It primarily focuses on only the positive attributes. Look at how good I am. Look at my numbers. Look at this project I just did. Oh, hey, I just took a call and the customer was really happy. It's always me, me, me. Narcissists are fueled by praise and adoration. They're very self-aggrandizing. When they see other people succeed or perform admirably, it sparks a sense of insecurity or inadequacy in the narcissist. And then they respond by trying to make themselves appear bigger or more successful. And they do that by making their perceived rival appear smaller or less competent. Now, any criticism, however constructive to the narcissist, is quickly turned back on the one offering it. Any attempts to call the narcissist on their behavior is met with gaslighting or minimization. And what happens is peers and supervisors feel very frustrated. They feel helpless. They get resentful towards the narcissist. And because narcissists are all about themselves, they are so hard to work with. People will shy away from having to collaborate with them. Eventually, team cohesion will erode and just fall apart if the narcissist is allowed to continue without being checked. Then we have the abuser. The word abuse comes from the Latin ab and use. Ab means to take away. Use is the Latin word for power. So to abuse someone is to systematically take away their power. Now, perhaps somebody in your workplace takes credit for your work or speaks over you in meetings or monopolizes the floor. They say things like, oh, we've run out of time. We'll get to your issues at the next meeting. Perhaps they're influential in policy making. Maybe they bend procedure so that it works in their favor, but not in yours. Someone the other day told me that she asked to work from home 2 days a week, and her manager said, no, you're client facing. We need you here in the office. And then when she reaches out to the supervisor and says, I need some help from you, the supervisor says, oh, that's too bad. I'm not coming in today. I'm working from home. That kind of thing. So it's like, okay, so procedure will work in my favor, but not in yours. Maybe the abuser has the ear of the decision maker and they use lies and manipulations to suggest that you're overwhelmed or incapable of handling your responsibilities. So they need to be shifted to the abuser. So very quickly, I'll tell you a story about, this is actually when I was in my private practice, and I hired someone. I brought her on because the work situation she was in was just unfair to her as a therapist. And I liked her. I thought she would be a good addition. So I had a referring partner that I was contracting out additional work. So I had set it up so that some of their administrative duties, some of their intakes and interviews, pre-interviews. So when this new person came on, I needed to get her working. I wanted her to start generating an income while she built her practice. And so I generated work for her through this collaboration that I had with this referring partner. And so things were getting busy for me, and I was having a hard time balancing. To be fair, I was having a hard time balancing caseloads plus doing the interviews. And so my lag time was a little bit longer. It wasn't as long as it had been before I took the work over, but it was still longer than I liked. And without me knowing, she went directly to my referring partner and had a conversation with them. And it sounded something like this. Oh, Julie's really busy. She's really overwhelmed. I think it's getting harder and harder for her to get these things in on time. So why don't you just send all of those intakes to me? And before I knew it, I wasn't getting any of those referrals. She was getting them all. And when I finally asked them about it, they said, oh, she said you were busy and that we should just send them to her. And I was like, oh, excuse me. that we never had that conversation. I never told her I was overwhelmed. That was a ploy to just literally take my business. And I was like, why would I generate an income stream and then hand it over to someone with 3 years experience when I have 25 years experience? That doesn't make any sense. It was supposed to augment her income, but it was also supposed to augment mine, right? So we worked it out and everything got balanced out. But had I not asked the question, I never would have even known that she had taken away my power in that way. See, so sometimes abuse can be very subtle and very subversive. So it can be more overt as well. There's the snide remarks, the insults, the backhanded compliments, the eye rolling, assigning meaningless tasks. social or professional isolation, and sometimes it does escalate into physical abuse, even in the workplace. It's important to note that not all narcissists are abusers. When abusive behavior is coupled with narcissistic personality and a victim mentality, this could very possibly be the worst type of toxic worker. And that brings us to that type, which is the bully victim. When an abuser has free reign in the workplace, it may result in social and professional isolation of the target. Bullies can be highly effective at convincing peers and managers that the target is the problem. They can say, oh, well, that person deserves to be treated that way. They deserve to be ignored, belittled, reprimanded, or demoted. So one of the cautions I would offer before we get to the bully victim is that managers must be careful to employ their critical thinking skills and remain objective. Don't get sucked into the narrative, especially when one person is leading the charge to discredit the target. The long-term effects of having an abusive employee, lack of engagement from those targeted by the bullying behavior, those targeted will go into survival mode. They will engage in quiet quitting, which means they'll do only the bare minimum to keep their job because the rest of their brain, frankly, their capacity is going to be dedicated to managing the attacks from the bully. They won't have capacity to take on extra stuff. They won't be able to remember that thing that they promised they would do because they're in fight or flight. They're in survival mode. And so when you see productivity starting to go down, when you see people starting to be stressed out by even the slightest little thing, it's probably a good time to check in. All right, let's talk about the bully victim. Often, this is the narcissist with abuser traits. They fall into this bully victim category. So let's be clear that the people who are targeted by toxic employees, they are the true victims, okay? However, the bully victim is the one who creates relationship problems and then cries foul. You know, when they're called on their behavior, then they're like, oh, I can't believe it, right? The crocodile tears come out. So the bully victim can be highly manipulative and may often be successful at convincing management and HR that they're innocent of all the accusations against them. And this results in punitive action being taken against the one who lodged the complaint. Because of this, many employers lose their best and their brightest and their most productive employees who would just rather honestly move on than try to fight for fair treatment in the current work environment. So now that we know what these toxic, poisonous behaviors are, what do we do about it? How can we intervene and start to stem the tide and start to pull the weeds? When we're talking about the steamroller, the key thing is to coach instead of challenge. Okay, it's easy to challenge someone and be like, oh my gosh, can you just stop talking for 1 second and let's hear everybody else out? We want to share all the ideas, but they're going to become defensive and they're going to argue as to why their idea is right. So what do you say when a steamroller attempts to hijack another employee's contribution by saying, oh, well, my idea is better? So it's important to remember that steamrollers often deliver a lot of bluster for their ideas, but very often those ideas are short on substance. Decisions that affect the bottom line and employee morale should never be made because one person shouted louder than everybody else. So ultimately, it's the leader's role to ensure that this doesn't happen. So how do we do this? I suggest posing questions as though they came from a third party. And this ensures that the steamroller will not attempt to derail the debate by attacking you. Rather, without a specific person on whom to focus all that belligerence and bluster, they get redirected to the issues instead, and they have to devise intelligent responses to the questions. So one of my mantras is always focus on the problem, not the person. Focus on the problem, not the person. So this strategy is called the third-party intervener. I'm going to say that again, just in case you guys want to write that down. Third-party intervener. So how this works. So rather than openly pointing out the challenges with the steamroller's ideas, because this will cause them to lose face, it might result in them taking the bluster up a notch, Rather than doing that, we use a coaching approach and we ask questions. But we ensure that the questions are always posed from the point of view of a third party. So instead of just saying, well, I want to know, we would frame it like this. What if someone asked you? So that's always kind of like your softener. What if someone asked you, if we follow through with the plan as you designed it, what will happen if, and then you list off the contingencies, right? Or you might say, what if someone asked you, where would we get the resources, the money, the staff to complete this project on time and under budget? And you're always making sure it's someone asking the question, not you. So when you ask intelligent, detailed questions and you remain focused on the problem rather than attacking the person, they won't have a choice but to reconsider their own ideas. And if the idea has merit, but it lacks the details and the logistics, they will have to go back to the drawing board and figure that stuff out. And while they're sorting out those missing pieces, then you can take the other contributions from your other employees and put them back on the table for further exploration. When we're dealing with the social loafer, okay, the key word here is accountability. When assigning projects to teams, leaders have got to be mindful of those who stay late and those who do more than their fair share of the work, as well as those who always appear to be very busy, or the ones that are always saying, oh, I have so much work, I'm so busy, I couldn't possibly take on something else because I'm so overwhelmed. If there's no proof of their productivity, if you're not seeing results, but they're constantly going on about how busy they are, pay attention. The social loafer is going to need a few gentle reminders. They don't need to be micromanaged, okay? Nobody loves to be micromanaged, but they may need a few gentle reminders, a few nudges to stay on top of their work. It may be worthwhile to check in with the team also intermittently to make sure that nobody's being overtaxed or taking on more than their share of work. Instead of putting the team together and speaking to the group, like when we're going to assign a new task, we're going to just pull the whole group together and say, here's the project. I want you guys all to work on this. Instead of doing that, let them know that they're working on a project together, but then assign specific tasks to each participant. So you identify the strengths that they have and that you've noticed in them, and let them know why you're trusting them with that particular task or with that particular role. So you state your expectations for each team member clearly and make sure that you reward everyone separately for their contribution, as well as congratulating the entire team when the project is complete. This way, people know that they can't get away with that diffused responsibility because they have very specific tasks that they will be expected to complete. All right, when we're working with the ideas thief, what do? It's important to implement a system, managers, that ensures that your team members are given credit for their ideas. So now the accountability falls to the managers. Encourage employees to document their ideas. Date stamp their written communications about their ideas. I always encourage people never, ever, ever share an idea just verbally if you want to receive credit for it. Make sure that you've documented it and that you've stamped it and that there's a paper trail that shows that you originated that idea. Give credit where it's due, managers. Acknowledge when great ideas come across your desk. Share with the team. Make sure everyone knows where that idea originated. It's really important that managers hold themselves accountable and keep their agreements. For example, if your organization has a bonus system in place for people who bring forward cost-saving ideas, one of our local universities has this in place. My best friend works at this university. She has brought forth ideas that have saved her departments hundreds of thousands of dollars in efficiencies. And she's never received the bonus because her boss always finds a reason to say, oh, well, we probably would have done that anyway, or some foolish explanation for why she doesn't deserve it. When you say you're going to do something, follow through, because employees have really long memories. And if an idea of theirs is stolen or agreements are not kept, they will remember, okay? And you'll see it in the effects of lower engagement, quiet quitting, or lateral transfer. And if someone comes forward with an idea that has originated elsewhere, bring them into the discussion. And when I say them, I mean bring the original person who brought the idea forward first, okay? Bring their name into the discussion. And you can do this in a really gentle way by saying something like this. Thank you so much for bringing this forward. It's really interesting that Holly suggested this very same idea some weeks ago. So let me loop her into the conversation, and we'll circle back around to it and we can all sit down and talk about it. It seems like great minds are thinking alike, right? Let's pull us all together and let's talk about it. So that way it's not like, well, Holly already told me about this. It sounds like you're just trying to steal her work. No, we're not going to say that. But we can do it very gently and let them know that this has already been presented. So thank you for sharing, but we know who the originator is. Then we have what we'll call the toxic trio: the narcissist, the bully victim, and the abuser. And so we have some very clear strategies that we want to share for these. So the key things for the toxic trio: number 1 is proactivity. Number 2 is investigations. And number 3 is documentation. So important. So first, proactivity. Employers, HR managers, and leaders, I plead with you. You have a responsibility to do what is necessary to support your productive, high-performing employees and to remediate the toxic behaviors before they poison your work environment. Proactivity is not the same as micromanagement. I can't stress that enough. Exerting too much control over the day-to-day runs counter to cultivating that peaceful, highly productive workplace. When employees feel like their every move is being monitored and critiqued, it creates this atmosphere that's rife with stress and anxiety, and people will just disengage, right? If I'm not doing that, I can't be criticized for it. You know what I mean? So they'll pull back. Lower productivity becomes the result, and ultimately you'll see a decline in your profits. So proactivity means being engaged and being aware of what is happening on the floor in real time. I can't tell you how many times people have given me feedback, and this is probably why I'm self-employed, but people give me feedback based on things that they were told, not on things they observed. And we can tell the difference as employees. So, I know it's easy for managers or leaders to get caught up in their own workload. It's easy to just be like, I'm just going to keep my head down, dodge the bullets, take care of my own work. They ignore the day-to-day activities in the workplace. But the thing is that the completely hands-off approach, it leaves room for weeds of negativity and toxicity to take hold and choke out morale and damage your bottom line. So to the last point in this list that talks about metrics and measures and outcomes, the bully victim may complain that, I have so much work to do, I'm too busy to help anybody else. But if the metrics don't bear that out, once you can produce numbers demonstrating a disconnect between their claims and the metrics, you can discuss ways that they can be more efficient in completing the tasks. And again, we discussed this so much in prepping for this presentation about how so many companies collect metrics, but then they don't review them. What good are they? Right? We'd look at the numbers and say, well, this person is outperforming everyone else, but here we have people who are performing less. They're doing poorer quality of work and they're getting paid more. Perhaps we should reward performance rather than seniority or some other artificial construct, right? So these are ways that we can help to keep people accountable without falling into the trap of micromanagement. So let's talk about documentation. One of the things my 12th and 13th grade English teacher said to me, I was still in school when we had grade 13, sue me. I'm old, I admit it. My grade 13 English teacher always used to say, when in doubt, check it out, right? When in doubt, check it out. Investigations are so important. They need to be fair. They need to be thorough. Employees need to feel heard. They need to feel validated that somebody understands their complaints. It doesn't mean that you agree with them. It doesn't mean that you're just going to arbitrarily punish other people, but you've got to validate how people feel. Attention has to be paid to what is happening on the floor. And when questionable behaviors occur, you can jump in and ask clarifying questions. Approach each situation without bias or prejudice. So for example, if you see two people, they look like they're in a heated discussion, there's nothing wrong with going, is everything okay here? Do you guys need some help? Just stepping in as a person willing to support will deter the bully from pushing forward their agenda, but it also rescues the target from that engagement, right? And it also lets people know that you're watching, you're paying attention. So it acts as a deterrent from those types of toxic behaviors. There's no need to be accusatory when you're investigating, but certainly, you can check in, right? It's a simple and non-confrontational way to hold people accountable for those communications in the office. And when an employee makes a claim of bullying or harassment, please take it seriously. So many times I hear this in the schoolroom and in the boardroom, this question, well, what did you do? What did you do? Like you deserved it. Okay, we need to remove that question from our vocabulary because it causes feelings of self-blame for the target. But rather you can ask, well, when that happened, how did you respond? Were there witnesses? How often has this happened? Did you ask that person to stop that behavior? And most importantly, because this is what's going to impact your bottom line, how have these interactions with this person impacted your ability to do your job? This is a good question. The other question you want to ask is, how do you feel about yourself? And how do you feel about working here because of what's been going on? Investigations must go beyond asking questions of the target and the person accused of the toxic behavior. This is real important too. You've got to speak to witnesses. I cannot tell you how many people have come through my practice who have launched complaints against bullies. And when WSIB steps in to investigate, the employer says, yes, we're going to interview all the witnesses. We're going to talk to everybody. And then they come back and they say, well, there's no evidence that this actually happened. And then when you press them, you find out that they never actually interviewed anyone. Scary, right? Here's the other thing. There are cameras everywhere, right? Everyone's got a camera in their hand. There are security cameras, if it's a healthcare facility, there are security cams in the hallways. If those security cams might have recorded the incident, watch the tape. Watch the recording. It doesn't take a lot of time, just watch it. Ensure that the people who were witness to the events feel safe in coming forward, because a lot of times you're going to see that witnesses will say, well, I don't want to get involved because they don't want to be targeted by the bully, right? If your organization has a reputation for punishing the people who call out toxic behaviors rather than punishing those that are engaging in toxic behaviors, and maybe I shouldn't use the word punish, but consequencing the people who are engaging in toxic behaviors, nobody will feel safe to report. What you'll see instead is an exodus of really great workers from your workplace. All right, so finally, documentation. Managers and HR professionals have a duty to record and document complaints and to investigate them fully and fairly. I just read an article today. I've been doing some research on school violence, and I read an article today that was put out by the CDC that said that the majority of schools in Ontario are failing to report incidents of aggression and violence in their schools to the ministry, and they're mandated to do it. They're liable if they don't, but they're afraid that if they do report, then they'll get labeled as a violent school, people won't want to enroll their students, and then they'll lose funding, right? So they're like, oh, we'll just pretend it's not happening, it's fine. I think a lot of workplaces might be like this as well. That it's like, well, if I don't write it down, it didn't happen. My Gen Z kids are like, Mom, if there's no pics, it never happened. I'm like, okay, this is why everybody's taking pictures and recording video, right? Documentation is key. So ensure that you document conversations, arguments, aggressions, or confrontations in detail if you witness them, and ask your employees to do the same. You want to ask, when did it happen? Where did it happen? Who was present? Did anyone attempt to intervene? Is there any physical evidence of the encounter? Does the employee have records of doctor's appointments and the physician's findings? Has the employee experienced health problems and excessive anxiety or stress because of it? All of this information will be important to follow up on or to launch an investigation. So the next question is, what if you're not successful? What if you're not successful? What if the weeds have fully bloomed and now they've gone to seed? And now it's spreading like wildfire through your workplace. What if we're not successful? What happens? Then all the beautiful flowers you were trying to grow, that is your employees, they'll either get burned out or worse, they'll die. In other words, they will leave. They will just walk away from your organization. If you're unable to get ahead of toxic behaviors, your employees are going to have 4 options. So let me run through them real quick for you. There's resistance, there's reporting, relocation, and resignation. So first line of defense when dealing with toxic employees is resistance. Resistance sometimes looks like defending oneself, calling out unacceptable language or behavior, using documentation as a way to protect oneself from unwarranted claims. A subtler form of resistance is resilience. And I love this little bit. I love that statement that resilience is resistance. So I'll give you the 5 pillars, and I'll do it very slowly. There are 5 pillars of resilience. Number 1 is self-awareness. Number 2 is mindfulness. The 3rd is self-care. The 4th is positive relationships. Now I want you to remember this because bullies, steamrollers, narcissists, abusers, bully victims are very good at breaking up relationships in the work environment and socially isolating the target. And so if positive relationships is a form of resistance, because it is resilience, that's the first thing that people will try to break down. So when you see people becoming isolated at work, pay attention and see if you can intervene. The last is purpose. So when someone loses their sense of purpose at work because the bully or the abuser has taken away their power, has taken away the significance of their role, has left them in a position where they have a job title, but they have a job title of junior manager, but they have no subordinates because all of those have been pulled away to different departments, or they're being given insignificant tasks. They're losing their sense of purpose. So we can help to provide those things within the workplace for them to help them remain resilient. But I also want to say that even the most resilient of employees will eventually buckle under the weight of abuse. So it's your responsibility to ensure that this doesn't happen. The next step up is reporting. Sometimes resistance and resilience is not enough to stop toxic behaviors from happening. So when it reaches that tipping point, the targeted employee may decide to report. They may take their complaints to HR, they may go to management, or if the workplace is unionized, they might speak to their union rep to determine the best way to proceed, should they file a grievance, whatever. So you need to do your due diligence so that the complaint or the grievance will be fully investigated, and make sure that you're kept in the loop all along the way so that you understand the findings. Provide ongoing support to the employee too, as the matter is investigated so that they know that you're actually looking out for them. The third thing is relocation, because here's the truth of it. Not all investigations will go as expected. Some, perhaps all the witnesses might decide, we don't want to get involved. They might refuse to answer questions. They might lie to protect themselves. Some leaders may be easily swayed into doing less than is required to resolve the issues. Like I said, some people will say, oh yeah, we investigated, but then when you really press them, you find out that they haven't done much of anything at all. Don't fall into the ostrich trap. Burying your head in the sand will not make it go away. If investigations don't result in a favorable outcome, it might then be just the smart thing for that employee to seek a lateral transfer to another location, another site, or another team. That way they can have some distance from that toxic coworker. At our local university, we had someone, one of my clients, was not quite the manager of the department, but she was a team lead, and she was exceptional, really good. Her direct report, her boss, was a narcissistic bully victim. And he was driving this poor woman crazy. She was becoming so emotionally dysregulated, and she was really struggling. And she was fortunate in that the chair of her department, who was the boss of her boss, was on the floor often and paid attention. And he noticed that there was something wrong and called her into her office. And she said that day she was ready to quit. She wasn't even going to request a transfer. She was just going to be like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. This guy was holding her in her office for 2-3 hours after the workday was over, berating her, not letting her get a word in edgewise, hollering at her, calling her names, minimizing, gaslighting, all the things. And she was just done. And the dean said to her, I need you to tell me what's going on. And so she broke, she told him everything. And he just said, do me a favor, give me 2 weeks and let me get this sorted out. And what he did was he gave her a promotion within her department and transferred transferred her boss, not just to a new role, but what he did was he said, this guy's strength is not in working with people, but he has a lot of good qualities that we can still exploit. So let's move him into a role that is better for him and that keeps him out of that position where he has to work with people because he's not good at that. And I will also move him across the campus so that you guys don't have to cross paths. What a beautiful thing to do. What a great way to protect this woman who was just really good at her job, and the university would have lost out if she had left, but she was ready to do it. And that's the last line of defense, right? The last line of defense is to walk away from the job completely. Remember that the cost of losing a good employee can cost upwards of 3 times their salary. And how do we get to that number? The loss of talent, loss of money that you've already invested in that person, their training and development, the loss of their contributions, and the expense of recruiting and retaining a new employee. So we really don't want to get people to the last line of defense. If there is a way that you can keep them within the organization and keep them safe, right? Physically safe, relationally safe, and psychologically safe, that's the thing that you want to do. Let's just run back to the weeds for a second. We understand the things that contribute to the growth of negativity and toxicity in the workplace. We also understand the different types of toxic behaviors, and we've looked at some of the things that we can do to remediate those toxic behaviors and to keep the weeds from spreading, if you will. But how do we cultivate a healthy, thriving, productive culture? I want to speak to that very briefly in creating a culture of community. Creating a culture of community. Business owners, employers, managers, leaders have got to be intentional about cultivating that culture of community that goes deeper. It goes deeper than quarterly bonuses or branded merch for the team. We've got to emphasize the importance of clear, empathetic, and collaborative communication. We've got to invest in equipping employees at all levels, with verbal and written communication skills that they need to be successful. And we've got to keep coaching them rather than saving all the feedback for the annual performance review. It doesn't make any sense to say, well, 9 months ago, you said blah, 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 and that was inappropriate. Come on, like we've got to address it as we see it. Now, I want to comment on this just real briefly. I know that to save money on live on-site training, a lot of companies, particularly the large companies, have turned to learning management systems. And these enable workers to get that just-in-time learning through a virtual platform. And this is great. It's cost efficient, it's time efficient, but it can't be the only solution. Employees have to be held accountable, and they've got to be able to demonstrate that they didn't just do the learning modules and write the quiz and get their little downloaded certificate. That's not enough. You've got to find out if they grasp the mission and vision of the organization. Do they embrace the company's culture? Are they committed to the organizational values that include words like teamwork, inclusivity, diversity, collaboration, safety? We've got to know if they've bought in. Finally, reward your workers when you catch them doing things right. They need to be checked when they're doing things wrong, but they need to be rewarded. They need to be acknowledged when they're doing the right things. And that recognition doesn't need to be public. It doesn't need to be a grand gesture, right? An email, a note card expressing your appreciation for their efforts. These little things can go a long way towards reinforcing those desirable behaviors. So the last example I'll give you is Associated Engineering. I did a series of seminars for them back in the day, and I loved their company culture because they were really intent on investing in their employees, not just in terms of training, but in coaching. And one of the things that they did every year was they would choose a charity and they would get together as a team and they would go out and they would support this charity. And so the charity that they were supporting at the time was Heart and Stroke Foundation. And here in Niagara, I don't know if you guys do it out there, but here in Niagara, they do the big bike every year. And so they called me up and they said, hey, we still need a couple of people for our big bike. Would you like to come and join us? So I was like, absolutely, sure. So I went out with them. They had t-shirts. So this is the branded merch, which, is not a bad thing, but it was appropriate for us all to be wearing the branded merch on the day of the big bike because it identified us as a team. And we went out and we all individually raised funds. We did the big bike. I think you have to bike for a kilometer or something, and everybody's trying to cycle at the same time, and they've got one person up at the front steering. It's a riot. And then we went out for a meal afterwards, and we had a lovely time. And I remember observing this team and seeing the way that the engineers interacted with the support staff and how the owners and the managers dealt with their employees. And it was just this feeling of camaraderie. And I loved that because they had tapped into cultivating that culture that goes beyond, we've got a job to do, let's get her done. Right? They actually fostered what we call pro-social behavior within the team, giving them a common goal and a task that they needed to work together to collaborate in order to have success in achieving that goal. And that is the key to having that kind of cohesive, productive work environment. So what's in it for you if you do this? If you weed out the toxic employees and you nip those toxic weeds in the bud, what's in it for you if you do this? Well, simply $12,506 per person, $420,000 a year. If you weed out the bad guys, you can grow and cultivate a beautiful garden. You'll have a stronger team, a stronger organization, higher levels of productivity, higher levels of engagement, and a higher return on your human resources. So why would you not want to do that? I want to close out by saying, my name is Julie Christiansen. You probably remember that. An aggregate communication expert. You can find me if you have questions beyond tonight. You can find me on LinkedIn. You'll just find me at Julie Christiansen. And my website, the link to my book, The Rise of Rage, is there as well. This link will take you to our page where you will find links to purchase the book at your favorite bookseller. You can also download the free workbook. You'll find me on Instagram at Jules_Christiansen. That's JULZ_Christiansen. My email is there.